Maybe. Well, here we are. Today we are going to be talking about what an equity focused master schedule does not look like. And so in our last IG live, which I feel was a minute ago, we talked about like why your master schedule should be one of the top priorities for your admin team, and how it does take a lot of time to build when you are doing it in a intentional, inclusive, and using an equitable lens. And so with this live, we're going to describe what a master schedule could look like if you're not prioritizing it, or if you're not trying to build it with an equity lens. And so basically what an equity focused master schedule does not look like. Because I feel like that might actually help people wrap their heads around what we say is an equity focused master schedule. Because if you're while you listen to these different, different points of what, is like, I guess, anti-equity, or like not being equity focused process, you might say like, huh, we do that. So I wonder, like, so at that point you might start connecting the dots and saying like, well, what can I do to make it more equity focused? So Christina, do you want to take us on to our first point, or first
Yes.
example, we should say?
So admin action number one, that is not equity focused in terms of the master schedule, is simply rolling over the master schedule. So in other words, like if it's like right now we're on the 2022-2023 academic school year master schedule, and on Synergy or Aries or whatever database you guys use to house your master schedule, you just press the button to say copy, and then you make it live. That is like, that's basically rolling it over. So you have the exact same teachers teaching the exact same line, number of courses, as if everything is identical, right? So we need to remember, y'all, a master's schedule should be based on the needs of our current students from year to year, okay? Because we need to remember, from year to year, your student count per grade level is different, right? I mean, the most obvious one is, and we're particularly talking about secondary or high school in this case, is that obviously, like, you have a whole class leaving, right? You have the seniors that are leaving, and then you have a whole freshman class coming in, but then the grades in between, it's like what a student may say is their grade level. We also need to consider the number of units too, right? So it's like there's just so many pieces about the student count per grade level. And then of course, right, the whole students meeting graduation requirements. I mean, that's just like an ongoing thing. I mean, I won't even say it's like a once a year thing. That thing is just constantly ongoing, especially since now the students have more options, right, to make up credits throughout the year, right? It's, or not even make up credits, even like to accumulate more credits. It's like they can take courses online, they can do dual enrollment, right? It's not just waiting for summer school. It's just all throughout the year. So just like how the graduation requirements, how it changes, let's say marking period to marking period, or even semester to semester. Same with the A through G requirements, right? Like where,
or college requirements, for those who are not
right,
in
the
California.
college entrance requirements, like that once again, that changes from semester to semester, or marking period, right?
with each group of student, right, Christina? Because if you're talking about rolling over, you're assuming that the kids from this year
Mhm.
need the same things as the kids
Or
for
have the
next
same
year. So that's where it's
interests
not
as
being
last year, right? And then
right,
like, you know,
right.
just the list goes on, but like the top ones that come to my mind is like, you know, the number of students who need math support, the number of students who need credit recovery, the number of students who need EL support or need to be exited, number of students who receive
Mhm.
SPED support, right? So, you know, there's many things here where you're just like, it's not the same. It's not going to be, it can't be as easy as a copy and paste from year to year. And so, of course, there are other things to consider is what, like the logistical piece, like we all know the budget changes from year to year. And when the budget changes, it affects the programs and the amount of sections, the amount of teachers, the amount of student options, right? And we all know what gets hit first, right? Are like the elective courses, um, and sometimes
Mhm.
specific programs. So look, when we roll over the master schedule, we are not doing what is best for our students, staff, and for the overall community. We are doing a disservice to our school community. And the ones most affected will be our Black, Indigenous, and students of color. So here are some possible solutions and recommendations to prevent you from being even considering rolling over the master schedule. You know, one way of doing it is just, I know it's easier said than done, but don't wait until mid semester to start gathering and planning. This is a year long process. And sometimes we feel like we just need to start in January. And it's, you know, a lot of the times it's because the district administrators, um, they usually send that out like their calendar, right? Like during that time or like in November or December. So you're like, according to their calendar, it looks like it starts in January. So I could get to start in January. And so we'll talk more about that in our workshop. Okay. We'll talk more about that of the district calendar versus a site level calendar. Another solution is to identify your MST team, like who is on your master schedule team. And once you identify those team members, identify the roles and responsibilities. Do not make any assumptions that everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to do, okay, and what exactly they're in charge of. And then lastly, I put here, you know, like use the district master calendar, which we will discuss more about, to help build your school site master calendar. And, you know, for former teachers out there who are now school leaders, like think of the master calendar or the MST calendar, think of it as your pacing guide, right? Your whole backwards planning.
The thing is, like, it still surprises me how many schools decide to just roll over their master schedule from year to year. And because it still happens. I mean, I think we heard someone talk, like one of the district administrators we talked to say that, one of their schools still does that. Like they roll over their master schedule. And to me, that just feels like it's really just checking the box. You know what I mean? Like just trying to get it done. And in that school particularly, like the question lies like, well, when you come back from the summer, like how much cleanup do the counselors have to do? And what are the counselors saying are some areas, like some gaps that they're seeing when trying to move schedules around or schedule new students in? And if that's not happening, like they're not going to know the issues that come up with their master schedule year in and year out. It's just simply like, oh, I checked the box because I got it done. Because, like, oh, it seems easy. I could just roll it over. And so, if we're really trying to center the educational experience of our Black and Brown students, we have to start being a little bit more intentional with planning out these huge foundational pieces in our school systems. And the master schedule is one. And I know we talk about like high schools because that's where a lot of like it gets, I guess the stakes are higher because of the graduation requirements and college entrance requirements, and plus because, to be honest, you and I mostly built high school master schedules. And it's just a little bit more intricate and involved than elementary school or middle school. But a lot of these questions can still apply to the lower levels because you're still thinking about the experience that your students go through on a daily basis when they're, walking to each class, or how teachers are assigned, or where the classrooms are located. Like all these little things that we tend to disregard or think that they're just like minor details, when in reality it could really shape the overall experience for our students and our staff if we take the time to really impact them with a team and look at data to inform decisions that we're making when it comes to building a master schedule. So I just wanted to add that because I'm, like I said, I'm still surprised that schools decide to roll over their master schedule
Yeah.
year to year.
And, and the thing is, what's crazy about it is that the people at the district office know it. It was
Mm-hmm.
like, it's not a
Yeah.
secret. I mean, there's no way you could hide it. But then the thing is, it's like they know it and they're not hiding it either. And so there's that piece. And, there's one particular school district or school site we spoke to that admitted that they did it. And, at first I was just assuming like best intentions, I guess, like, oh, it's because we came out of COVID and I understand you need to, you know, this year it would be great if we could thrive, but right now we're just trying to survive mentality. But then it turned out that they were even doing this prior to COVID. So I was like, oh, dang, okay.
Right. Right. No, exactly. When it's like that's like the standard practice, it goes back to this like thought of like, oh, but we've always done it this way. That's what it reminds me of. It's like, oh, but we've always done it this way. And that's where we get really stuck in these traps of not moving forward and not really discovering, or I don't want to say discovering, but actually doing something about the issues that we know we're facing in our schools. So, anyways, rolling over is just like a big issue for me because I feel like even when I was an admin, I had a supervisor that wanted me to just roll over the master schedule. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I do like to treat every single school year differently because our students change. And so, and our staff changes. So it's like, we got to start over. I mean, there's probably some things that you could duplicate, but not roll over the entire
Absolutely.
master schedule from the year before. So, okay, the second thing that an equity focused master schedule does not look like is using inconsistent data sets to guide your decision making process. And so when I say that, like the thing that comes up is this, I like it's gatekeeping, right? Is thinking through your systems around placement, your systems around, your class sizes. All of these, all of these decisions should be based on data and very
Mm-hmm.
specific sets of data. We're not talking about like qualitative data or data that like what's it called, anecdotes, right? We're not talking about that. So when I'm saying like, when I'm talking about this inconsistent or unreliable data, I'm thinking about like grades, like using grades to inform placement for students in certain areas, like an AP class or a math class or even a science class, because this comes up a lot. So like, especially like when we talk, because grading is all like there's a big discussion around grading right now. There are some schools that are
Mm-hmm.
piloting, grading for equity, and even within that, there is still some disagreement, and there are
Mm-hmm.
departments doing it differently. So, with that, like using grades is an inconsistent or unreliable data set because it's not all aligned. So, if a student gets a B in one chemistry class, but another student in a different chemistry class has an A, and you prioritize a student with an A, I mean, they're not the same teacher, and so you can't rely on the grades being exactly the same unless there's been a larger discussion and things are aligned. But even so, grades really shouldn't be used to inform your
Right.
placement
Right.
decisions, or really.
I mean, going back to that whole chemistry example, right? It's like even within like horizontally or vertically, like it's not aligned, right? Because you could have like your um chemistry, your 2 3 chemistry teachers, right, where the grade breakdown is all different, right? Where it's like you have one
Mhm.
teacher where assessment or summative assessment is 50%, and then the other one, your partner is summative assessments 15%. And I'm using those numbers like because I've seen, right. I've seen um what do you call those things that we would ask teachers to submit at the beginning of the school year? Yeah.
Their
Like
syllabus.
that's like one of the things that was one of my roles and responsibilities, is just collecting everyone's syllabus and like looking. I mean, there's always the shoulda, coulda, woulda, but like one of the things that I just made sure that I did was that at least that there was consistency within a department when it came to grade breakdown. But it's like, but that is just a tough decision.
But I mean, bas- basically though,
Right.
that grades are subjective, and so so when we're talking about building an equity focused master schedule, you really need to look at what the policies and procedures are when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to course placement. And using something like grades is not consistent and it's not reliable. And so that's where, that would be something that we would say not to use if you're informing placement. Another thing is teacher recommendations. Like this is like a big one for me just because I was a counselor for so many years before being an administrator, but like teacher recommendations are subjective again. Like they're not, like, often the things that I've heard from teachers about what a student should or shouldn't take and why they're saying those things are, are just the definition of really being deficit focused
Mm-hmm.
and not thinking of students as a whole. And so, the students that the conversations that I had primarily centered around are students of color and whether or not they were ready to take an AP class or whether or not they would do well in an advanced science course at this school, right? And so that's where teacher recommendations should not be a part of your master schedule placement process, because that is not really taking into account the whole child. And also, really, again, it's not setting up access for students to take courses that they're interested in and to support them in those courses so that they can be successful in them. And so, whether it be a list that the department or the teacher submits to admin, or a half sheet on a programming sheet that the counselor has to sign off on to make sure that there are specific, prerequisites, all of that would be something that we would see in a master scheduling process that is not equity focused. The other thing that, I mean, happens a lot in schools that are very much like, I don't know how to define it, but just high stress and like, high, yeah, right, Kayla? Your teacher recs don't necessarily help, and some teachers can be subjective. And so we have to think about like what are other ways that teachers and departments can provide feedback in building the master schedule, but removing their feelings around a student's, preparedness, or their students' ability to succeed in the class based on their expectations or what they deem as standards to meet, right? So the other thing is automatic placement based on parent requests or demands. And so again, I've seen this in like really high, I hate saying this, but like schools, like high achieving schools, right? Or the schools with these high test scores. But oftentimes you're seeing them skew to, oh, thanks, Kayla. I see this conversation skew towards like parents and families that have privilege and that know or not know that feel like they can just call up the assistant principal and say, I see that my student didn't get placed into AP chemistry, and this is something that we've discussed, and so you need to place them in AP chemistry, and not having a policy to come back to explain why a student isn't just directly placed because the parent wants them to. And this is something that I ran into in a former school that I worked at just recently, where we would get a lot of those parent demands. They weren't even like conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to just say it. They were demands, that their expectations were that their kid was going to take the 5 AP courses because that's what's going to get them into Harvard. And we are in the school side, we're trying to figure out are we going to diversify these AP courses with only one section and make sure that we're supporting our Black and Brown students who want to take AP chemistry, that they get a shot at taking the course. And so with that conversation meant we built a policy around it and clearly outlined how we place students, and if they were put on a waiting list, what our process was to place students from the waiting list, so that it was not just because that parent called the superintendent 10 times. And it was easy to back up because we had a very transparent system, and it was based on our vision around the classes our students take and the outcome that we expect for them once they graduate from us. So it's, again, if you are just placing based off of parent demand because it's easier and you don't want to deal with the headache, that itself is not an equity focused master schedule procedure or protocol. So just think about that if your school happens to be doing that. So when we think of best practices around this, we like to think about whether, regardless of the course, whether it's an advanced, an AP course, honors, or a support course, that is best to synthesize at least 3 data sets, reliable data sets. So your state data, whether it's state testing or whatever, state level data, your district data, maybe there are some district agreed upon assessments that are used in certain areas, so pulling from that data. And then any common formative or summative assessments that were graded with a rubric and like a common rubric and same unit outcomes, meaning that there's been some alignment within a department, there's been work in a PLC, and there has been an agreement to use this data to discuss maybe English placement, like whether or not it's English support placement, because it's been reviewed, it's been discussed, it's been assessed, it's been, really like there's been a cycle of inquiry around what this combative assessment says about the students' readiness for certain levels of courses. So using very reliable sources of data. And the other data is street data. And I that's something that y'all will hear about if you listen to our podcast later on. But we, talked about street data with the author, and having, getting information from students as far as like what works for them when it comes to picking courses, how it works for them, when courses are placed, like, having math before or after lunch, like just having those conversations and building that into the timeline so that you include their voice in the process beyond just filling out their course request sheet. And so an example of that, and I've seen this work in different ways at different schools, one example that I will put out there is just reaching out to students based on the data set criteria. So if you're looking at specific, the state data, the district data, or even if you're looking at AP data, like AP enrollment data, and you realize that, this course in the 11th, AP US history does not reflect the demographics of our school, instead of just placing students in there or just saying, oh, maybe they don't want to take it, they meaning like our students of color, they don't want to take it, really having a system where you make it a standard practice for all students to access information about AP courses. So having informative sessions about what AP courses are, either during lunchtime or through a video platform. Um, Having counselors reach out to students, maybe do some focus groups around like why students aren't picking these courses, because that was very helpful at my last school site when we did a very intentional, focus group around why our Latinx students were not signing up for AP US history. And understanding from their perspective why it was really uncomfortable for them to sign up or even stay in the course, because we were able to get some to sign up, but then come fall time, they were requesting to be taken out. And that is an example of street data, right? You have to ask those very important and thoughtful and intentional questions of your students to understand, because the other data that I mentioned is very quantitative, right? It's gonna tell you the numbers. You could try to form a story, but with the street data, you're then able to really get that full picture of what the data is telling you about placement for students and where you could push them, right? Because we're not just talking about like, oh, we need to like keep students isolated in these, standalone support classes, but how do we also push our students in the direction of, accelerating the rigor? So that's just like the second thing, right? All of that I said, like using unrelatable data sets or not using any data at all is an example of what an equity focused master schedule does not
Yeah,
look like.
and just to like speak on a few of those things that you mentioned, that you talked about, is like, I think like when we talk about, data and like unreliable versus reliable, what we're really talking about is just consistency, right? Is like assessments that are used school wide, right? It would be nice if it's district wide. That way
Right.
there's consistency throughout the district. But let's start at our school site. Um, and I've when I was in charge of like ILT, instructional leadership teams, which is predominantly like the teacher leaders, department chairs, a lot of the times they're like, well, I don't want to use the state data. Like, I don't like, I understand that that's what we're
Right.
supposed to, that's what we as a school or community, that's what we're graded on. But I feel like the data is unreliable, or I feel like it's biased. So usually my response to that was like, okay, that's fine, but then create an
Mm-hmm.
assessment. Like what the whole,
But
it's
not only that,
consistency,
Christina, it's like you're not
right?
it's not just using
Three
one
is
though. We're
three.
saying use three to identify, like if like the state data, the state test, and I mean, of course, the tests there are biased,
Absolutely.
right? There's a lot of biases that we need to unpack and discuss about these state level tests or SAT or any of these tests, 100%. But if you're going to at least, measure them against each other and say, based on the state data, the student did this in math. But in our department, like this assessment that we all give because the district purchased this license and we all give it the same way, it says this about the student. And then our department also has this summative
Right.
assessment that we've created and that we analyze. And we're noticing that this student across all three lines should actually be in AP Calculus, but they signed
Yeah.
up for math
And
concepts or
I'm glad.
whatever. That's when you can like evaluate
Right.
and put them against
And
each
that's what I
other
was
to
going to
try to
say,
fill
is
in the
that
gaps.
not my second to the last school, that was actually a district wide policy for specifically for us. So anytime we did placement, whether it's in an advanced course or a support course, we had to use three sets of data: one from the state, one from the district. Actually, you had a choice. It could be one from the state, two from the district, or it could be one from the state, one from the district, and then one if your department had like a department wide assessment, right? It just simply can't be
Mhm.
like, oh, this is what I created in my classroom, and that's it.
Right,
So
right.
there's that piece. And then also, going back to the example that you pointed out about the AP, placing students in AP based on the data set criteria. uh, you know just to like expand on that even more is like, and to tackle that on to a street data example is like, I've seen it where um like we have the breakdown, right? We do our 3 points of data, and we already identified like, okay, these are all the 11th graders that could qualify for English Lang, right? And you host your lunch sessions, you host your parent nights for that particular class, and then it's time for it's time to do the course selection. And then I've seen counselors match it where they're just like, okay, these are the students who applied for the program, the AP Lang class, and these are the ones that didn't, but yet they do qualify for it. So what do the counselors do? They pull in the students, they get the street data, and they tell the students like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, just to let you know, like, you qualify for this class. And a lot of the times it's the Black and brown students who, one, they don't even realize that they qualify for the class. Like, they're just like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Or two, they may know it, but they're, for some reason or another, they don't want to be a part of the class. And so that's when the counselors, right, that's when they do their thing, and they inquire about it. Like, okay, tell me why, like what happened, like, you know whatever it may be. Maybe their friends aren't in it, or they're just like, I don't really see people like that look like me in the class, or I don't know, like, I'm just like, whatever the reason is. But that's where you pull
Yeah.
that street data, and just like
Mm-hmm.
filtering it to where you do need to like pull street data to to humanize it. It's like students and,
Right. Because if not,
right,
we're going to be operating based off of assumptions. And I think that's where we like, that's where the trouble happens, is we're assuming why, our students of color are not taking AP US History or AP Lang, instead of actually taking the extra step of pulling straight data through focus groups or one-on-one conversations, or even, conversations with the departments of what they've seen over the years. So yeah. What's one more thing, Christina, our last
okay.
our last one that
So
we
we
want to
already
point out?
mentioned this word earlier today, like 20 minutes ago, as well as our last one, our last live. So, but y'all, we feel the need that we need to say it again for the people in the back. Okay, we got to say it again because this consistently and constantly happens. It's gatekeeping. Okay, and specifically, the examples of gatekeeping is when veteran teachers are the ones that are teaching the higher level grades, um, AP classes, or honors classes, or accelerated classes, whatever you call it at your school site. The same old systems that keep white and selected Asian groups as the majority of the students who mainly populate the AP and advanced courses. Okay. Or even like the ones that are mainly um, that mainly enroll within the support classes, right? It's like you just keep that system going over and over and over and over again. Okay. The EL, I hate this term, but it's used, the EL lifers, right? It's long
Our
term
LTEL, our
English
long-term
learners,
English
right?
learner.
It's like, okay, what are like, okay, by the state, specifically in California, right? There are specific parameters of placing them in EL and also taking them out, right? Like they tell you exactly what data to use. But the thing is, it's like there's more to, okay, what's the in between, right? Like what are, like, let's talk about instructional practices, or like talking to the students, informing them, teaching them how to assess, like, there's all those in between pieces there. And then also like the math enrollment. As we said before in the last live, math courses, and now really like, I feel like even science too. No, let's back it up, because now that we transition, specifically in California, transition to Common Core, because of that Common Core, literacy is imperative. Literacy is imperative, especially in math and science courses. Like the math books and the science books do not look the same from when we were in high school. Like I opened up a Eureka math book the other day. I barely saw any numbers, y'all. It was like a whole bunch of word problems. So there's an issue if the students are not reading or writing at the grade level. So those are just the many examples of gatekeeping, which Alina and I could go on and on and on about. So moving on to solutions, okay? So once again, a lot of these solutions, y'all, like we brought up 3 problems, but like if you notice, the solutions are there's not a whole list of solutions. Like they come up a lot, which is a good thing, right? So once again, a solution would be gather data. Gather the data to help name and identify the common issues. Identify and reflect on the process that places students in these classes, whether they're support or higher level classes. Identify and reflect on the lack of processes that keeps the students in these classes, right? It's like sometimes we have good processes to put them in there, but it's like, okay, what are we going to do to get them out of there? Specifically the support classes. And then make some changes. Make some changes, the much needed changes. Reflect on your school's vision, mission, and values, and use that data to guide your revolutionary next steps. Like just embrace, like have a different mindset. Embrace, see discomfort, see challenge as a positive outlook, not something to fear.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, Christina. It's like when I think about this concept of rolling over, I feel like that's like based in fear or based in like rushing things as opposed to taking time. And so with all of this, like notice that we're not specifically talking about like putting the pieces on the board. Like there's a lot that comes that leads you up to actually placing sections on that board, either physically in the principal's office or digitally on a spreadsheet. Like that we could talk about and help you put your sections and like run through like conflicts. What we're talking about is like the actual process, the foundation, like where you start and how you map this out so that you are focusing and centering your students' experiences so that you're really focused on equity in your master schedule. So mapping out this entire process, understanding who your team is, understanding the data sets that you're going to use, planning and plopping down those meetings in the calendar ahead of time, not waiting to January to start talking about section allocation, to really, prepare yourself and make this a year-round thing versus a spring semester task. And so that's where, hopefully this gave you some insight on like what an equity focused master schedule does not look like. So you can ask yourself and call out what's happening at your school site if were nodding your head at a couple of things and that they sounded familiar because you do them, to say like, okay, the solutions sounded more equity focused. Like, how do we shift it even if we've already started our process? And so our call to action for all of you on this call, and something that we don't do good enough, Christina, is introduce ourselves. So I'm Elin. I'm a former school counselor and former assistant principal, and I now coach school leaders mostly in California, but are open to other states as well. And we're really looking at equity as the main focus in leadership decisions. So that's who I am, Christina. You want to just quickly say who you are before I
Yes,
wrap
I'm
up with the call to
Christina,
action?
former high school English teacher, former admin, VP, AP principal, and now I am currently a site. I was going to say site level coach. I'm currently a district coach, and then I also coach school leaders with my fellow partner Elin.
So our call to action to you is we have a few things. The first one is that we have a free workshop coming up next Thursday on March 23rd. We'll be hosting it at 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That might be difficult for some of you school leaders, but maybe you're on campus and you decide to stick around for the workshop. We'll also offer the recorded version for up to a week after the session ends. But that session is going to be the top 3 things you need to do before you start building your master schedule. And the reason why I say building, because again, all the things that we want you to do before you start placing those chips or those sections on the board. So the top 3 things. We're gonna walk you through the questions, like what type of questions or feedback that you should get from your community, whether it be from teachers, from parents, or from your community members or your students. Looking at that street data and aligning it with the other static, reliable data, really interrogating your timeline and seeing how it's built out and what's included in that timeline. And auditing, like the data collection and analysis, like how are you auditing and analyzing the data that you're using, and what are the questions and systems that you do that you set up for that. So if you're interested in the workshop, it is free. The sign up is in the link in our bio. If you just put in your information there, you'll get the information for the workshop that'll be happening next Thursday, starting at 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The last thing I wanted, well, that's 2 things, is if you want to work with us, we offer one-on-one coaching, very specific and tailored and personalized to your own goals. And so if that's something that you are a current school leader and you want that extra support, that is something that we can offer and would love to offer you. So if that is something you're interested in, please DM us or schedule a call. That link is also in our bio where we can talk to you a little bit more and see, how we can support you. Last thing is that we do have a podcast. So the Empowered Educational Conversations with Elin and Christina. So if you vibed with this conversation, we do a lot of these types of conversations on our podcast, and we invite guests in and really amplify the voices that we feel aren't often heard in our educational world. So wherever you listen to podcasts, access that. And we hope you join us on this journey. So thanks, Christina, and take care,
Bye,
everyone. Thanks
y'all.
for being here with us. Bye.